The room was filled with people who believed power always wins. Polished marble floors reflected crystal chandeliers. Men in tailored suits stood around a long conference table, worth more than most people's homes. At the head of that table sat Victoria Hale, tech billionaire, media darling, and the youngest CEO to take her company public before she was used to silence when she entered a room. But today, she was bored. The acquisition deal in front of her was routine. Another struggling logistics company on the verge of collapse. Another signature that would turn someone else's life upside down. Across the table sat the company's owner, Daniel Mercer, single father, former military engineer, and a man who hadn't slept properly in weeks. He didn't look broken. He looked tired. Victoria tapped the pen against the contract lazily. "This is generous," she said coolly. "You keep a consultant title, health coverage, and your employees receive severance." Daniel didn't look at the numbers. He looked at the clause buried on page 12. The one that dissolved his company's independence entirely. "My employees built this place," he said quietly. "They're not numbers." A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Victoria smirked slightly. She had heard that line before. Passion, pride, emotion. It never survived long against market logic. "You're bankrupt in 60 days, she replied calmly. "I'm offering survival." Daniel leaned back in his chair. His suit was clean, but clearly worn. His hands carried the faint scars of someone who had actually built things instead of inherited them. "Survival without dignity isn't survival," he said. The room stiffened. Victoria raised an eyebrow. She wasn't used to being challenged in her own boardroom. "Careful," she warned lightly. "Emotion doesn't pay salaries, and ego doesn't build loyalty," Daniel replied evenly. There it was. A quiet defiance that didn't beg. It didn't shout. One of the investors coughed awkwardly. The tension in the room thickened, but Victoria didn't look away. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, resting her chin on her hand as if studying something interesting. "You're proud," she observed. "I'm responsible," Daniel corrected. Victoria glanced down at the unsigned contract. She was seconds away from ending this. She could walk away, let his company collapse, and acquire the assets cheaper in 2 months. But something about him irritated her, or intrigued her. She picked up the pen again, spinning it between her fingers. "Tell you what," she said suddenly, a playful edge creeping into her tone. "If you can convince me in the next 60 seconds why I shouldn't crush this deal, I'll reconsider." A few executives laughed nervously. Daniel didn't. He stood up slowly, not dramatically, not angrily. He simply placed both hands on the table and looked directly at her. "You don't need my company," he said calmly. "You need my design." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. He continued. "The autonomous routing system you're buying? It only works because I built a fail-safe algorithm no one else understands. It's not in the patent. It's in my head." The room went silent. Victoria stopped spinning the pen. "You're bluffing," one investor muttered. Daniel didn't look at him. "Am I?" Victoria stared at him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. "Kiss me and I'll sign," she joked lightly, gesturing toward the contract. "That would at least make this interesting." "Ah!" The board members chuckled. Daniel didn't move. He didn't blush. He didn't play along. Instead, he said something that made every laugh in the room die instantly. "I'd rather lose everything than sell myself." And just like that, the room went silent. The laughter didn't just fade. It died. Every executive in the room suddenly became very interested in the marble floor. Victoria's smile remained, but it was no longer playful. It was measured now, calculating. She had made a joke to assert control. It answered with dignity. Dignity in a room like this was dangerous. "You misunderstand," Victoria said lightly, though her tone had sharpened. It was humor. Daniel didn't sit back down. Humor is usually funny. A board member shifted in his chair. Another cleared his throat. This wasn't the script they were used to. CEOs dominated rooms like this. Struggling founders negotiated quietly. They didn't refuse. Victoria set the pen down slowly. "You're in no position to moralize," she said evenly. "You came here because you're out of options." Daniel nodded once. That's true, it was the honesty that unsettled her. "But I won't teach my daughter," he continued calmly. "That desperation means surrendering your self-respect." The word daughter changed something in the air. Victoria leaned back slightly. You're using sentiment as leverage. I'm using truth, he replied. Silence pressed down again. Victoria glanced at the contract, then back at him. You claim the algorithm only works because of you. Prove it. Daniel didn't hesitate. Give me access to your current prototype. It's 10 minutes. A few executives exchanged skeptical looks. Victoria tapped her finger against the table once, twice, thinking. You're stalling, one investor whispered. No, she replied without breaking eye contact with Daniel. He's confident. She stood. Bring up the demo system, she instructed the tech lead near the far wall. The lights dimmed slightly as a large screen flickered to life. Lines of code scrolled. Routing simulations ran in real time, tiny digital trucks moving across a virtual map. Victoria crossed her arms. 10 minutes. Daniel stepped toward the screen. His movements were calm, precise, not arrogant, not rushed. He asked for keyboard access and began typing. The room watched. For the first 3 minutes, nothing happened. Just code adjustments, small changes. A few whispers broke out among the executives. Then Daniel paused. Your system collapses under dual-node disruption, he said quietly. What? The tech lead asked defensively. Daniel simulated 2 simultaneous traffic failures on opposite ends of the grid. The digital trucks froze. The system rerouted once, then stalled. A red warning symbol flashed across the screen. The room stiffened. That's a test anomaly, someone muttered. No, Daniel replied. That's a structural flaw. He typed again. Lines of code appeared that weren't previously visible. Secondary failsafe. Engaged. The trucks recalculated routes instantly, splitting traffic dynamically instead of sequentially. The red warning disappeared. The simulation stabilized. No one spoke. Victoria stepped closer to the screen. You didn't add new hardware, she observed. No, Daniel replied. I changed decision hierarchy. The algorithm was prioritizing speed over adaptability. Her tech team stared at the code like it had betrayed them. Victoria turned slowly toward him. Why wasn't this included in the acquisition documents? Because you didn't buy my mind, he answered simply. You tried to buy my company. The room remained frozen in stunned silence. Victoria looked at the contract again, then back at him. For the first time since the meeting began, she wasn't evaluating profit. She was evaluating character. And the man she had just tried to embarrass had calmly proven he was worth more than the ink waiting on that page. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, it was heavy. Investors who had arrived expecting a routine acquisition were now witnessing something far more unpredictable. Victoria Hale, who rarely hesitated, stood still in front of the glowing screen, studying the updated system as if recalculating more than code. Run it again, she said quietly. The tech lead complied, initiating the same dual-node disruption scenario. The digital map pulsed. 2 failures triggered simultaneously. This time, the algorithm adapted instantly. Traffic split, rerouted, stabilized. No freeze, no red warning. The room didn't clap. It absorbed. Victoria turned slowly toward Daniel. You held this back. I protected it, he corrected calmly. You let your company collapse instead of licensing it? Let my company struggle, he replied. There's a difference. The distinction wasn't lost on her. Victoria walked back to the head of the table, heels echoing against marble. She picked up the contract again, flipping past the signature page, scanning clauses she herself had approved without reading too deeply. You were never here to sell, she said. I was here to negotiate, Daniel answered. And if I refused? He met her gaze evenly. Then I would rebuild without you. The confidence wasn't reckless. It was rooted. Victoria sat down slowly. The board members began murmuring again, sensing the shift in momentum. One investor leaned forward. Victoria, this is unnecessary risk. We can reverse engineer the update. Daniel didn't argue. He simply folded his arms. Victoria glanced at the investor. Reverse engineer what you just watched in real time? Silence. She looked back at Daniel. You embarrassed me. I answered you, he replied evenly. There was no apology in his voice. And that irritated her more than defiance would have. Victoria leaned back in her chair, studying him carefully. You could have played along with the joke. Daniel didn't blink. I don't teach my daughter to trade dignity for opportunity. Again, the daughter. Victoria felt something unfamiliar stir memory. Her own father had once said something similar before selling a small business and losing everything anyway. Pride, she had learned early, didn't survive markets. But perhaps she had been wrong about that. "What do you want?" she asked finally. Daniel didn't hesitate. "Equity partnership, not acquisition. My team remains intact. Independent oversight of the algorithm's deployment and no layoffs." The board erupted. "That's outrageous. He's bankrupt. This isn't a charity." Victoria raised her hand. The room silenced instantly. "You're asking to sit at my table," she said quietly. "No," Daniel replied. "I'm asking you to build a bigger one." The audacity. And yet the logic was undeniable. Victoria stood once more, walking slowly toward the window overlooking the city skyline. Her empire had been built on dominance, on strategic absorption of smaller innovators. But Daniel Mercer wasn't just another failing founder. He was leverage, and leverage was power. She turned back toward him. "If I agree," she said carefully, "you answer directly to me." The tension sharpened again. Board members watched like spectators at a high-stakes duel. Victoria stepped closer until they stood only a few feet apart. "You realize," she said quietly, "this changes everything." Daniel didn't look intimidated. "Good," he replied. For the first time in years, Victoria felt something she hadn't expected in her own boardroom. Victoria returned to the head of the table slowly, the room watching her every step like investors tracking market movement. She picked up the contract again, flipped to the final page, and then did something no one in that boardroom had ever seen her do. She tore it in half. Gasps rippled across the table. "Draw up a new agreement," she said calmly, placing the ripped pages aside. "Joint venture, 40% equity to Mercer Technologies. No layoffs. Oversight committee shared." The board erupted immediately. "This is reckless. You're giving away leverage. He needs us more than we need him." Victoria didn't raise her voice. "He needs us," she said evenly, "but we need his architecture." The room quieted again. She looked directly at Daniel. "You will answer to performance metrics, and you will respect structural integrity," he replied. A flicker of something almost like approval passed between them. The legal team scrambled to draft revised terms. Investors whispered in low, urgent tones. Daniel returned to his seat calmly, not triumphant, not smug, just steady. 40 minutes later, a new contract lay on the table. Victoria signed first. She slid the pen across to him. This time, there were no jokes, no performance, no provocation. Daniel signed. The room remained silent not because of tension now, but because something had shifted. Power had not been seized or surrendered. It had been negotiated. As executives filed out, some clearly displeased, Victoria lingered. "You surprise me," she said quietly once they were alone. "You tried to test me," Daniel replied. "I did, and icked." She allowed herself a small smile. "You passed." Daniel didn't smile back. "That wasn't the goal." Victoria tilted her head slightly. "Then what was?" "To protect what I built," he said simply. For the first time, she saw something beyond defiance. It wasn't ego driving him. It wasn't pride. It was responsibility. And responsibility was far harder to intimidate. Days later, news of the joint venture made headlines. Analysts called it uncharacteristic, bold, risky. Some even suggested Victoria had been manipulated. She didn't correct them. Instead, she scheduled a private visit to Daniel's headquarters, a modest industrial building compared to her glass tower. She arrived without press. Inside, she watched engineers working side by side, focused, loyal. No one looked terrified of losing their jobs. Daniel noticed her observing quietly. "You could have crushed us," he said. "Still could," she replied calmly. He met her gaze. "But you won't." Victoria studied him for a long moment. "Do you know why your response silenced that room?" she asked. "Because I embarrassed you?" "No," she said. "Because you didn't flinch." She stepped closer, her tone lower now.
Nice.
People in that room would have laughed at the joke, or played along, or tried to charm their way into survival.
You didn't?
Daniel's expression remained steady. "I'm not for sale." Victoria's eyes held his. "I know," she said. That evening, she returned to her office and replayed the meeting in her mind. The joke, his refusal, the way the laughter died instantly. Power, she realized, wasn't always about dominance. Sometimes it was about restraint. Months later, the joint system launched successfully. The algorithm performed flawlessly under stress testing. Industry journals credited the partnership as visionary. But inside that boardroom, everyone remembered the real turning point. Kiss me, and I'll sign. And the man who replied, I'd rather lose everything than sell myself. I guess sometimes the strongest move in a room full of power is refusing to trade your dignity for it.